Greetings and blessings, YouTube. This is John the Jansenist. And this evening I'm actually going to be beginning what will likely be a very long series dealing with the moral reflections of the Gospels by Pasquier Quesnel. Now, to give you a little bit of background, Pasquier Quesnel was a very influential figure, in fact, the de facto leader of the Jansenist movement in France going into the late 17th to early 18th century. And at that time period, things had gotten very bad for the movement. The attitude towards the movement within the Catholic Church had basically become very unfavorable as far as the papacy went. The Jesuits had been very successful in ruining the reputation of very pious Augustinians and had essentially likened them to Protestants, even though most of them were supporters of the Ultramontane movement, which was gaining strength at that point, and that was the movement that eventually pushed for papal infallibility. And a lot of them, barring perhaps the exception of Jansenius, the founder of the movement himself, were very much vocal in restoring the moral rigors of the Roman Catholic Church. The problem, of course, being is that Rome, at this point in history, had no longer any interest in maintaining those moral rigors in any way. They were much more prone to laxity, and we have Blaise Pascal to thank for continually reminding us of that through his work, The Provincial Letters, another very important Jansenist work. But this work is different in that this work, the Reflection of the Gospels, really brings out the pious nature of Jansenism and separates it from any form of Catholicism. In many ways, one could liken it to the Catholic version of Calvinism. And thankfully, due to the efforts of several Reformed Christians in this country for the first time, Pasquier Quesnel's Moral Reflections on the Gospels is actually available for consumption by Americans via the American press. And there was a very nice foreword written by one of the people responsible for this translation being made available, and that is Henry Boardman. And I'm going to start off by reading his foreword to you so you can get an idea of just why it is that I feel such a kinship with the Reformed movement, despite the fact that I have some very strong differences with them on the issue of worship. In particular, I think that proper worship demands more than two sacraments and more than the meager services that they basically provide, which they have basically from the broader Protestant movement. Okay, and here is the preface. There is only one way of accounting for the remarkable fact that no edition of this work should, up to this period, have been issued from the American press. Quesnel, if known at all, is known simply as having been a minister of the Roman Catholic Church, and Protestants have stood aloof from his commentary without examining it. Had they looked into its history and that of its author, they would have learned that it brought down upon his head the anathemas of the Vatican, and that it was against these very notes the famous bull Unigenitus was directed. In that bull, 101 propositions, for the most part of an eminently scriptural and evangelical character, are deduced from this work and condemned as heretical. The fact should be sufficient to commend it to the attention of enlightened Protestants. Quesnel, it is true, could never throw off entirely the effects of his early training. To certain Romish errors he adhered to the last, and these disfigure more or less the original editions of his notes. A large portion of the obnoxious passages were omitted in the English edition of the work, but a careful revision has brought to light a considerable number which had been overlooked. These have been expunged. To this point, indeed, the editor's task has been chiefly restricted, the cancelling of Romish errors, which must have impeded the circulation of the volumes and limited their usefulness. As regards the merits of the work, eminent authorities have pronounced it the best practical commentary on the evangelist extant. It is not, however, a commentary in the usual signification of that term. It is neither a critical nor a popular exposition, but a collection of moral reflections on each verse of the Gospels. In this view it is unrivaled, a repository of original, striking, scriptural meditations, the absence of which could be supplied by no other work in our language. "We have nothing," says Bishop Wilson, "in practical divinity so sweet, so spiritual, so interior as to the real life of grace, so rich, so copious, so original. We have nothing that extols the grace of God and abases and lowers man so entirely. We lessen not the value of our various admirable comments on the New Testament. They have each their particular excellencies, but none of them supersedes Quesnel. None can supply that thorough insight into the world, the evil of sin, the life of faith and prayer, which he possesses." In illustration of these topics, the reader is referred to the copious and discriminating introduction by Dr. Wilson. Meanwhile, the work is submitted to the public with the confidence that it will speedily become, with very many Christians of different names and sects, their favorite handbook on the Gospels, and through the blessings of God, an efficient help to their growth in grace and their true spiritual enjoyment. Henry Boardman, Philadelphia, July 3rd, 1855. So yes, this edition of the Moral Reflections was actually originally published about 150 years ago, and it has since become public domain, so I am now free to read from it for all of you and not have to suffer the inevitable DCMA that would likely come from all the various trolls on YouTube. So I will dispense with going any further on this subject right now, and I will save the next actual episode of this series for actually starting on the Gospels and the reflections that Quesnel has provided. But I will say this: anyone who holds to the doctrine of efficient, sufficient, sovereign, unfailing grace will want to read this work. This is something that any Calvinist, Lutheran, Anglican, or any other member of the Reformed tradition should read. And it is true that if you are able to procure one of the earlier versions that was written in French, that you will get a lot of different things in there aside from the actual discussions of grace that are compatible with Protestant thought. This is actually a work that is very much a Roman Catholic work, but this particular publication will read more like a middle ground between the two. And indeed, I do have a couple of agreements with Boardman regarding some of the issues that Quesnel had with the Calvinist movement. I would not consider myself to be nearly as hostile to Calvinism as Quesnel was, bearing in mind, of course, that Quesnel was trying to stay within the Roman Catholic paradigm during his life and only left it when he realized that his persecution would not end because what he was pushing was biblical truth, and the Jesuits could not have that taking hold of Rome after they had gained as much power as they had after the passing of the heretical Council of Trent. So he was the one who set about the task of starting up Jansenist churches. He couldn't continue doing it in France because of the persecution, and he ended up relocating to Holland, and he ended up in Utrecht. And indeed, he is most responsible for starting what became the Union of Utrecht and the church that I now attend today. So until next time, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, God be with you.